But look, what did it take for us to get to the point of an apology? We had to threaten a lawsuit, Jesse. And by the way, we're still entertaining it. We're talking to some of the best lawyers out there that are experts in this. And as you know, these things can be very complicated. There's a lot of facts and circumstances around it. But we're not going to let this go, because you should not be able to smear 5,000 high school and college kids and then just be able to walk away with it. And the reason they felt they needed to do that, Jesse, is because if they told their audience the truth, that when gas is the most expensive it's been, flights are super expensive, that 5,000 kids decided to spend a weekend in summer traveling across the country to go hear from conservative speakers, maybe the audience of The View would think twice about all of their ideas. That's why they felt so compelled to try to smear our wonderful summit this last week.
Yeah, Charlie Kirk's the founder and CEO of Turning Point USA and the author of the new book, The College Scam. So, Charlie, do you accept The View's apology?
I mean, regardless of whether or not I accept it, the question is, do our students accept it? That's really what's at heart here. They went after our 5,000 students at our event there, of high school and college kids. And look, I get attacked all the time. People say false things. I'm a public figure. But when you go after 16 and 17-year-olds that travel from across the country, that then have to live for the rest of their life with a shadow over them because someone at ABC says that they might be linked to neo...
Her disgusting, gross elitism and her complete out-of-touch nature with respect to the rest of the world. Sunny Hostin goes on The View and decides now would be a great time to dump all over the so-called uneducated.
What we did not have is white women who voted about 52%, right, for Donald Trump. Uneducated white women, is my understanding. You have Latino men, actually, voting more for him. And you have, and black men was not the story. We're not the story here, because they voted almost 80% for the vice president.
Right. It wasn't a slip-up. It wasn't satire. It wasn't even clever. It was a blatant, nationally televised smear. On a regular episode of ABC's The View, the self-congratulatory echo chamber masquerading as a daytime talk show, several hosts decided they'd take aim at more than just Charlie Kirk. This time, they went after a theist. 5,000 high school and college students who had done something apparently unthinkable in the eyes of mainstream media, spent a weekend voluntarily listening to conservative speakers. The target? Turning Point USA's Student Action Summit, a youth-focused political gathering in Tampa, Florida. The accusation? That the event had somehow allowed or welcomed neo-Nazis. A label that not only smeared the organization, but tainted every teenager and young adult in attendance. And the worst part? The hateful agitators weren't even inside the event. They were outside, uninvited, unwelcome, protesting the summit. But that didn't matter. In a few offhanded comments,
Because you didn't go to college doesn't mean you're stupid, and it doesn't mean that you don't have wisdom. You can go to college and get a bunch of irrelevant facts about how men can allegedly give birth or whatever they teach. But I said this to our team. I said working people, the muscular class, including working women, they are so in favor of Trump, and they don't want to be called stupid or uneducated.
The View blurred the lines and detonated a reputation nuke. It was narrative over nuance, propaganda over facts. And for Charlie Kirk, it wasn't just insulting, it was actionable. While the hosts laughed it off with smug contempt, Turning Point USA moved fast. Kirk's legal team fired off a cease and desist letter, demanding an on-air apology and full retraction. The message was clear.
Point conference. These were in the front of out there in front of the conference with anti-Semitic slurs, and
I think it's important that every single person that attended that Turning Point, every Republican speak up against the because against the flags that were waved.
You let them in.
President, open your
You let them in and you knew what they were.
Right.
So you are complicit.
You don't get to call innocent kids Nazis on live TV and then pretend it was just a hot take. This wasn't edgy commentary. It was defamation wrapped in a daytime bow. But here's the bigger problem. The View didn't just go after Kirk. a public figure used to the slings and arrows of media attacks, they went after teenagers. Many were just 16 or 17 years old, high schoolers, first-time voters. And now, thanks to a few reckless statements from multimillionaire hosts, they were being linked online to the most repugnant ideologies in modern history. Some of them Googled their own names and saw neo-Nazi appear in the results.
Now we begin with a shocking apology just a short time ago from the ladies of The View to Turning Point USA. A war of words broke out after the conservative group was rallying the next generation of voters at its youth summit in Tampa, Florida this weekend. And the liberal panel just couldn't help themselves. The group sent a scathing cease and desist letter after hosts on The View suggested that Turning Point had embraced neo-Nazis who showed up outside the event.
Think about that. Think about applying to college or your first job, only to discover that a clip from The View, viewed by millions, carelessly tied you to white supremacy. That's not just irresponsible, that's malicious. And it didn't stop there. In classic corporate fashion, ABC tried to sweep it under the rug. After intense public pressure and the looming threat of a massive lawsuit, the network issued a brief apology.
Do you think if a liberal came to speak at University of Kentucky, they'd give an open mic like I just did to a conservative and had a discussion like this?
I certainly hope they would.
No, they wouldn't. Because speech is not a left-wing value. That is why they have to deploy shock troops called Antifa to go after everywhere I go. When I go to University of California, Davis next week, there has to be 120 police officers because of the threats, the violent threats of liberals that want me dead, that want to disrupt our events. There are no right-wing hecklers that come to events like this.
But it wasn't sincere. It was the PR equivalent of a hostage note. Dry, begrudging, and clearly written by lawyers. No real accountability, no personal ownership, no correction from the host who said it. Just enough to technically comply and hope the story would fade. But it didn't. Because Charlie Kirk didn't let it. He took the next step, preparing a $100 million defamation lawsuit. A legal bombshell designed not just to clear his name, but to send a message.
It's amazing. She's specifically there referring to the women, but of course it's the non-college educated men as well who voted for Donald Trump. And the nerve of this woman to whom the country has given so much to try to dump on people who didn't go to college. Look at you. Look at your achievements. How do you like the so-called uneducated now, Sonny?
Can't destroy people's lives on national television and walk away with a shrug. And the timing? Couldn't have been more revealing. Inflation was soaring. Gas prices were breaking records. Flights were more expensive than ever. Yet 5,000 students from across the country chose to spend their summer traveling. Not to the beach, not to party, but to hear ideas. Conservative ideas. In a world where most political engagement from Gen Z is filtered through TikTok, virtue signaling, and leftist orthodoxy, this was dangerous. Not to society, but to the narrative. If The View's audience ever saw that thousands of students were energized by free markets, individual liberty, and pro-America values, it would destroy the illusion they've spent years constructing. So instead of reporting the truth, they had to destroy the optics. They had to make these kids radioactive. If they couldn't win the argument, they'd poison the well. That's what this was. Deliberate political hit job, masked as casual commentary. Let's call it what it really was, media malpractice. What's especially grotesque is the elitist sneer behind the accusations. The assumption that if you attend a conservative summit, you must be uneducated, bigoted, or easily manipulated. It's the same condescending tone the liberal elite reserves for middle America, the so-called flyover country, full of plumbers, electricians, small business owners, and truck drivers. You know, the people who actually keep society running. But for Sunny Hostin and her co-hosts, it's easier to generalize than to engage. so they didn't bother drawing any distinction between outside protesters and the kids inside. They didn't pause to consider how dangerous it is to associate a political event with literal Nazis. They just said it. Because they could. Because for too long, shows like The View have operated with total impunity, protected by studio applause, liberal groupthink, and the assumption that no one would ever punch back. Well, someone finally did. Charlie Kirk could have just clapped back online. He could have written an op-ed or gone on a podcast rant, but he did something far more powerful. He sued. Not just for himself, but for the thousands of kids who were defamed by proxy. Kids who now have to live under the digital shadow of an accusation that should have never been uttered in the first place. Kids who made the mistake of being politically curious in the wrong ideological direction.
Let me kind of humble the audience a little bit. Donald Trump won by less than a point in Wisconsin, about 28,000 votes. He won by a point-ish, 1.2 in Michigan. And then he won by 1 point in Pennsylvania. And so, Megan, it is conceivable that without this record movement of youth vote, he doesn't win.
Kirk's message was crystal clear. You want to talk recklessly, then defend your words in court. And suddenly, The View didn't look so smug anymore. When The View finally responded, it wasn't with grace. It wasn't with empathy. It wasn't even with courage. It was damage control. Corporate, cold, and calculated. After the cease and desist letter hit, the executives at ABC realized something. This wasn't going to vanish in a news cycle. This wasn't just a loud conservative complaining for attention. This was legal. This was serious. And worse, it was making them look like what they actually were. Elitist bullies with microphones. So, in classic cowardly fashion, The View issued a brief, lawyer-vetted apology on air. They admitted, barely, that the neo-Nazis were not invited or affiliated with Turning Point USA. They clarified, through gritted teeth, that the protesters were outside the event. But they didn't retract the original implication with any force. They didn't name who said what. No one took ownership. They didn't apologize to the students they smeared. And most telling of all, they blamed the legal team. They didn't say, "We were wrong." They said, "Our lawyers said we had to say this." That's not remorse. That's a hostage video. Charlie Kirk didn't buy it. And neither did anyone paying attention. On Fox News, in interviews, and at speaking events, Kirk made one thing crystal clear. The lawsuit was still on the table. Why? Because the apology wasn't for the students. It was for liability. It was a corporate strategy to reduce risk, not a moral reckoning. As Kirk put it bluntly, regardless of whether I accept the apology, the question is, do the students accept it? And let's be honest, why would they? These were 16 and 17-year-olds.
You can go to college and get a bunch of irrelevant facts about how men can allegedly give birth or whatever they teach. But I said this to our team. I said working people, the muscular class, including working women, they are so in favor of Trump and they don't want to be called stupid or uneducated.
Some of them attending their very first political conference, coming together to hear talks about entrepreneurship, limited government, American history, faith, freedom. And now they're permanently associated by a national television broadcast with one of the most reviled ideologies in history. All because a panel of overpaid television personalities didn't like who they were listening to. Let that sink in. If a conservative TV host even accidentally misrepresents a progressive activist, the media launches into an instant outrage cycle. There's a parade of retractions, sobbing interviews, and long Twitter threads about accountability in journalism. But when the left targets conservative youth, crickets, unless a lawsuit is involved. And don't forget, it wasn't just a one-time blunder. The hosts of The View doubled down after the initial blowback. Sunny Hostin, the show's resident legal voice, actually tried to reframe her statements as noble. She wasn't smearing teenagers, she claimed. She was raising concerns about political extremism, except she wasn't. She was drawing a sloppy, dangerous equivalence between literal white supremacists and politically active high schoolers. And she did it with a smirk. Even worse, she followed it up with a race-based tirade that only added fuel to the fire. Hostin claimed that Trump's support came mostly from uneducated white women, and implied that Latinos and black men who voted for him were being misled or didn't understand the stakes. That wasn't political analysis. That was elitist venom, dressed up as punditry. She wasn't just insulting Charlie Kirk or Turning Point. She was insulting millions of Americans who didn't graduate from elite universities, didn't subscribe to progressive dogma, and had the audacity to think for themselves. It was a masterclass in liberal condescension. She didn't care that millions of voters had made a choice. She cared that they'd made the wrong one. Charlie Kirk saw this for what it was, a pattern, not a mistake. A pattern of slander, guilt by association, and narrative control. Because if even a small group of young people starts asking real questions, attending conservative events, and challenging the mainstream script, the media freaks out. It threatens the illusion that the next generation is 100% progressive. They can't allow that, so they destroy. They paint you as dangerous. They call you racist, sexist, homophobic, or worse, they associate you with violent extremists. And once they've done that, your voice doesn't count anymore. Your opinions aren't just wrong, they're immoral. That's the real strategy here. And The View just happened to be the one dumb enough